So, welcome back to another episode. And this one is a long time coming. This is something I wanted to talk about for quite a few years, and a lot of people have asked me when I was going to do this. Well, finally, today I get to talk about one of my favorite pastimes, and that is tabletop role-playing games, Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder. Now, the episode is called D&D Rocks because I began playing Dungeons & Dragons. That is the main game that I actually play. But there is other games as well, like Pathfinder and the Middle-earth role-playing game, but we'll get to all that in a little bit. How do I even begin to talk about Dungeons & Dragons and my lifetime experiences with it? There's so much to talk about. So it might be a few episodes. I'm just going to kind of go for it and see where it takes me. I think I have to start right at the beginning, and that is the early 80s for me. And I had an episode on Choose Your Own Adventure books, and those were my first experiences into a form of role-playing game where you would actually have a book and you would actually navigate through it. You were part of a story, a narrative story, but you could choose where you want to go. You had a bit of freedom. And I really liked this aspect. I actually liked it so much that back when I couldn't afford video games, I would actually, here's a little book for a game called Govelius. It's a role-playing game on the Sega Master System. I would actually create my own little Choose Your Own Adventure books based on that. Because I couldn't play the game, I couldn't, my parents wouldn't buy me the game, so I had to create my own little books for myself to entertain myself. I had a whole bunch of these books. I created my own Choose Your Own Adventure books. And I started to realize, especially after watching movies like Conan, Hawk the Slayer. I love Hawk the Slayer, I gotta say that. I started to realize this may sound funny, but in 1987, going into 88, I actually had a moment. Now, this sounds hilarious, but I actually had a moment. I was on the school track, and I guess we were jogging around the track. Maybe I had some extra oxygen to my brain that day, I don't know. All of a sudden, it just kind of hit me how much I enjoyed the fantasy genre. All of a sudden I started thinking about things like skeletons and monsters and all this kinds of thing. All of a sudden I realized, wow, I really like this stuff. I don't just kind of like it. I kind of become like a small obsession, a very small obsession in my mind. I didn't really know, what I could really do with it, but this is where I actually met Rob's brother, Gordon, and some other friends of mine down the street, and they were playing Dungeons & Dragons. Really, it was very cool, and I tried to play Dungeons & Dragons with a friend of mine who had a couple of the books. I think it was like first edition, and neither of us knew what we were doing. We had no idea, so we're trying to play this game. It doesn't even make any sense to us. And I'm like, I liked the fantasy aspect of it, but I didn't know if that was for me yet. But it was when I was down the street playing with Rob's brother and some other friends of mine. Actually, where I first played Phantasy Star and some of those games at, I realized that this game was for me. This game was cool. How about I give it a little bit of a setup of what Dungeons & Dragons or fantasy tabletop games are about, where it's basically you all sit around a table. And this is when it starts to become really nerdy, and I always hate that term, because you can enjoy these games. You don't have to be some nerdy, horrible person to enjoy them. I don't know where that ever started from. It did start in the 80s. You played Dungeons & Dragons, you didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody. It had such a bad stigma to it. You were like some Satan worshiper. That was a whole other thing in the 80s too. You played Dungeons & Dragons, you were a Satan worshiper, but basically you sit with your friends, and one person plays the Dungeon Master. Has that amazing title, I know, but and he narrates the story to the rest of the players, and the players all have their character sheets, and it has their hit points and their intelligence, constitution, wisdom, charisma, all that stuff, their equipment on there. Basically, your entire character is on the sheet, and you have this the Dungeon Master narrating the story to you, where you're going. He's saying things like, you start in this town. The town is, it looks like this. Here's a map of the town. Where would you like to go? What would you like to do? And it sounds like, well, how could that be fun? Where the magic of Dungeons & Dragons is, this is the magic. How everybody interacts with each other around the table, and how a story starts to develop and starts to get, it's quite amazing. The Dungeon Master may be pushing the story this way, but the players push it another way, and such crazy random things happen. And that's where the magic of the game happens, and some of the hilarity of the game happens. I have never laughed as hard with my friends, you know, playing any other game, but Dungeons and Dragons can really create some hilarious situations. So that is the basic basic setup of the game, and you do dice rolls according to hitting monsters, fighting monsters, making checks, checking for traps, that kinds of thing. So that's how the game is played. You play with dice. I was playing it in '88 with my friends, but here I gotta give you some of the old Dungeons and Dragons stories. What I thought was funny back then, we would sit around for like 4 hours making our characters and going through the books, and the rules are very complicated to make a character. Now you can just do it online. It's a lot easier. It does all the the mathematics for you and all that kind of stuff. But back then you're flipping through the book going, okay, I this plus this and this and this. And it took you a long time to make a character. It took me a long time to make a character. I had everybody help me because I didn't quite get it. And I finally, what would be great is we'd finally make our characters after 4 hours. We're like, yes, we can finally play. We start playing, and all of a sudden we're in some tavern or something. And then the players, you know, who are supposed to be getting along, start arguing with each other. And then they start fighting each other. And then they would kill each other. And this is the way Dungeons and Dragons went for me in my early teens, where the players would just argue with each other, and that's another thing. They would just argue about the rules for like an hour. You know, like one person's pseudo dragon familiar would get killed, and people would be arguing about it for like an hour, and I'd be sitting there going, "Can we just like play the game? I just kind of want to explore and have a bit of fun." But that wouldn't happen for a few more years. So here's something that you will find fascinating. It's something I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, is that I was enjoying the game, and I played with my friend Andrew down the street, and we had a great time when I started DMing. And I started DMing. I thought that was the best way to control the game and keep everybody under wraps, because some DMs would just let this stuff go on forever. And I just wanted to stay with more of the exploration. I enjoyed the exploration of the game and putting the players in interesting situations, type of thing. But here's what's interesting that happened. This is so unusual. In 1989, I did, you know, I became a skateboarder and all sorts of crazy stuff, whatever. Who cares about that? But I did something stupid. I started smoking cigarettes. I smoked cigarettes, you know, for the next 18 years of my life. And that's important to the story, because as soon as I started smoking, I don't know what it was, maybe a change in my lifestyle, all this kind of stuff. I stopped playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I kind of just thought I didn't think I was outgrowing it, because I still love video games and things so much, but I kind of left Dungeons and Dragons, and my interest changed. Now, I didn't play Dungeons and Dragons ever again. I didn't ever play it again. All for the next, here's the thing, the next 18 years. Now, I went and I actually decided to quit smoking. Thank God. I was an idiot for smoking. I finally quit smoking. And I did cold turkey. I quit for good, and I still quit. I'll never smoke again. 2 weeks later, I realized, I guess I have a lot of time. The oxygen is coming back to my brain. I'm looking around in line, and all of a sudden, the urge to play Dungeons and Dragons came back feverishly. All I was thinking about, man, I really like to play Dungeons and Dragons again. But geez, I got nobody to play with. That was my big thing. And I'm like, well, what versions of Dungeons and Dragons do I play? Now, I check on Amazon to see what was going on. I go to DungeonsandDragons.com and all that kind of stuff. Because I'm only about Dungeons and Dragons. That's the only thing I know at that point. All of a sudden, I find out that 4th edition is coming out.